Is my new temporary worker a 1099 contractor or are they a W-2 employee? This is the question that business owners and staffing agencies wrestle with constantly. And the fact is, it can be a bit of a gray area to determine a new worker's employment classification. So to help employers with the question on how to classify their new worker and let them know what will be considered if ever audited on the matter, the IRS has boiled down the list of factors used to determine a worker's status to three main categories. Number one, behavioral control. Number two, financial control. And number three, relationship of the parties. Number one, behavioral control would be whether there's a right to direct or control how the worker does the work, such as if they were to receive extensive instructions or training on how to perform their duties, kind of like how, when, and where to do the work, what tools or equipment to use, what assistants to hire to help with the work, where to purchase supplies and services, specific training about required procedures and methods that must be taken to perform the work, and so on. Then number two, financial control, would be whether there's a right to direct or control the business part of the work. Things to consider on this front are whether the worker has significant investment in their work, like if they've purchased the tools and equipment needed to actually do their job, if their expenses are typically reimbursed by the employer, or if they're expected to be taken on by the worker, and if there is opportunity for profit and loss on the work performed. And lastly, number three, relationship of the parties. You see, these would be the facts that illustrate how the business and the worker perceive their relationship. Things such as offering employee benefits like pension, paid leave, insurance, and so on would pretty much indicate that this person is a W-2 employee. But if all other factors haven't made it clear up to this point, the written contract between the parties can actually help make the final determination on the relationship that's been established. In order to best illustrate these factors, let's look at two example hires, a temporary dental assistant and a temporary dentist. The temporary dental assistant is typically going to be given instruction and training on how, when, and where to perform their duties to best protect the employer from liability. They're typically going to be under direct supervision of a licensed professional. They're going to be hired at prevailing hourly wage rates. They're not going to be expected typically to pay for or bring in their own tools and equipment to perform their work. And depending on the length of employment, they may actually be entitled to certain benefits offered by the employer. So based on those facts, and even in light of a written contract that may say otherwise, this person is operating as an employee and should thus be put on a W-2. Whereas if we were to consider a dentist being hired to work for the practice, the written contract between the parties is probably going to be the determining factor on how to classify them, because dentists typically will not require much or any instruction or training on how, when, and where to perform their duties, as they might ultimately be responsible for their own liability and have their own liability insurance. They also probably do not require direct supervision of a licensed professional, as they are one. They might even be hired to take care of a certain number of clients rather than a certain number of hours of the day, and paid based on a fee that takes into account their operational expenses. They might even be expected to pay for or have access to their own tools and equipment to perform the work. They could potentially even have their own independent practice, allowing for this to be a secondary opportunity for profit. All that being said, they may actually wish to keep themselves independent from the employer via contractual arrangement to be able to realize the deductions that they would otherwise lose as a W-2 employee. So while there's no black and white answer, and it might be plausible to create an employment arrangement with a new hire to classify them as a 1099 rather than W-2, keep in mind that if that hire finds they better fit in the classification of W-2, they can file a Form SS-8, and the employer will be on the hook for those unpaid payroll taxes. And the more that happens, the more likely that employer is to be audited by the IRS and incur costs much greater than just the missing tax that's owed. So at the end of the day, just remember, if it looks like a duck, if it swims like a duck, and it quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck.